So I guess this is episode 2, technically.
Yeah.
Episode 1 is somewhere on the website.
The lost episode.
The lost episode. Our goal is to make these video casts, I guess they call them, but we're just going to have a placeholder image for this one. Cool, so we just want to start making some content where we just kind of get ideas off of our head, and maybe not in the same kind of polished format that they usually are when we make our videos, because there's a lot we think about and only a little bit of it makes it into the videos. So, yeah,
the format of this is sort of what we've been working on this week. We'll just talk about it amongst ourselves and, try to share our process and our ideas.
Exactly. So, first topic we want to talk about is you spoke at the Ember NYC meetup last week. That was last week, right?
Last Thursday.
Last Thursday. And you talked about a bunch of stuff, but one of the big things, the things I thought was most interesting was your comments about FastBoot. So, why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, so the talk was about data loading and just talked about some ways to approach data loading in an Ember app. And towards the end, I wanted to highlight FastBoot. It's something we recently added to EmberMap, and it's something we recently added to EmberMap.
So what did you think it was going to be like when you added FastBoot?
So I thought FastBoot was going to be a drop-in replacement. Now I knew that we had some code where we were accessing like the window property, the window global, and I knew that wouldn't work in FastBoot. So I thought we were going to have to find any route that was resetting scroll position and make sure that it wasn't trying to access a window or do a scroll to in FastBoot.
Why did we want to add it in the first place?
So we added FastBoot because
Because the boss said so.
Yeah, because the boss said so. We added FastBoot because EmberMap is an Ember app, and we share a lot of our content on Twitter, Reddit, and when you share an Ember app on these social media sites, the social media bots, they don't run JavaScript. So they request your index.html, but they don't run the router, they don't see any content that's going to be rendered. So there's just a link that says embermap.com, but we don't get any of the goodies that come with a web app that's normally shared on social media, like OG tags.
Autoplay videos or...
Autoplay videos.
We're not quite there, but...
Yeah. Last thing our users want to hear is autoplay videos. But yeah, we can't embed videos, we can't add images to Twitter. And those things, those are the things you notice when you're scrolling through your Twitter feed.
Right.
I think Medium does a great job at their social sharing strategy.
Or people share our links sometimes in
Slack. Yeah, on Slack. So
then it would just come up with the same
link,
generic kind of title for the whole site.
Exactly. So we wanted FastBoot so we could generate that content on a server, so that when you share this stuff on Slack or on Twitter, that it looks nice and it's relevant to the page you're sharing. So there'd be a poster image of the video, a description of what the video's about. And I would say it took us about 2 weeks to get FastBoot in. That's not 2 weeks of full-time work.
Right.
But it was probably about 2 weeks with all the testing and ironing out the bugs. And then kind of towards the second week, it was really understanding where FastBoot's strengths are and where its weaknesses were, and making sure we weren't exposing our users or our website to its weaknesses.
It's interesting because there were some other folks in the community who started talking about FastBoot more publicly, right around the time we started using it, and I think you had the hype cycle at the beginning, the idea of FastBoot is so compelling that basically anyone who's writing an Ember app will get server-side rendering with one command.
Right.
But like in the last year with the push for PWAs, some of those trade-offs seems to be different. Where, a couple of years back, everyone was talking about server-side rendering, whether you're making an Ember app or React app or whatever. That's kind of this like gold solution, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now it's like it's not always evident, like if it's actually what you want to do, because there's probably not a silver bullet.
Right. One of the things is, when you load an Ember app for the first time, it's noticeably slower than if you were loading a server rendered app. And so you want to use FastBoot to speed that up. You want to deliver just the HTML to the client, and it can just paint right away. And then the Ember app boots up in the background. Kind of one of the things we realized is FastBoot doesn't speed up your Ember app. You still need to render your Ember app on the server. So if your page has a lot of user-specific content on it, then the Ember app has to run on the server, generate that content, and send it down to the client. And if your Ember app is slow on the client, well, it's probably going to be slow on the server.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking like seconds slow. I mean, I'm talking like if it takes 700 milliseconds to render on the client, it's going to take 700 milliseconds to render on the server. So your page doesn't just automatically become fast by installing FastBoot.
Yeah, I like that example you said, which was like, when you render Ember apps on the client, you're probably doing it on a modern computer with tons of memory and
super fast
modern browser,
latest version of Chrome.
Exactly. Whereas in whatever server you happen to be running, you're still running that JavaScript in a node environment, but now it's like in a server resource that might not be as powerful.
Right. You think about most web apps are optimized for bursts of CPU. But they're not constantly rendering Ember apps.
Right.
They're low memory environments. I think our servers, we use Heroku, and we have 512 megabytes of memory.
Right.
Compared to that to my MacBook that has 16 gigabytes of memory.
Right. So the real benefit of rendering the server is caching.
Yes. So that's sort of one of the things we after using FastBoot for about a week, we realized that this is FastBoot's strength, is that you can render the page once on the server, cache the page, and then serve the cached version to your clients.
And then you can avoid the work.
Right, because that's going to be super fast. Now you go from, you're serving from cache. You're not running the Ember app. You're not generating the HTML. You've already got the string stored in the cache somewhere.
Right.
There's a trade-off here, though, is that, again, I talked earlier about, user-specific content on the page. If you have user-specific content, like let's say you're working on an accounting app and you have someone's, balances and invoices and bills, you don't want to serve that to all your users. And also, too, if you have thousands of users, now you need like a cache per user, and
kind of defeats the purpose.
Defeats the purpose, yeah. So our sort of sweet spot is caching. Our sweet spot is caching pages that aren't user specific. So if you go to EmberMap and you look at a blog post page, there's nothing on that page that's specific to the user. So this is perfect for FastBoot because you can cache it. It's going to have those social tags that we want. And initially it might be slow to render, but like I said, you can cache it.
Right.
It's a little repetitive.
Right. Nice. And then the other point about FastBoot was the fact that you will run into some issues with it when you're figuring out which add-ons were built for the client and don't work in the server. But you can take an incremental approach to adopting FastBoot, right?
Yeah. So one of the great things that comes with FastBoot is there's a FastBoot service, and you can inject it anywhere, and you can know if you're running. Your components will know if they're running in a FastBoot environment, or they're running on the client. And certain add-ons don't work in FastBoot. Certain add-ons are made for the browser, and if you're using those, well, you would just wrap them in if not FastBoot, then I can run this.
And you can even split on route. So you can even just start one route at a time. For instance, on blog post route, and say, let's do this in FastBoot, and then at the server layer, the server logic you're writing, right, the node logic, you can say, ignore?
Right. So we're using FastBoot App Server, which is the way I describe this is FastBoot. The FastBoot technology is an Express middleware, and FastBoot App Server basically gives you an Express server.
So you get to hack around a node for a little
So you get to hack around a node.
Which is your favorite thing.
Yeah, you get to feel like a rock star when you're writing node code. All this power and no constraints. But the FastBoot App Server, because it's an Express middleware, you can insert middleware before you get to FastBoot. So we have some middleware that says, based on the type of browser you're using, based on your user agent, or based on the page you're visiting, we can make a decision to serve you the FastBoot page or just serve you the normal index.html from a build and let your browser, boot and run the Ember app. And this works well because we know we have some pages that one, we don't care about if they're served by FastBoot, and two, they might be buggy and we don't want to serve a crash page to the user, so we can just opt out of FastBoot for these pages.
So if there's a bug in FastBoot, it brings down your app basically, because before your app gets sent up, it has to be rendered within that node environment.
So it's easy to crash a FastBoot server, but then not even, crashing the FastBoot server, it sucks, but at least you know about it. But there's also memory leaks in FastBoot, so this might be something that you're not really aware that it's happening. Your website's still up. It's just slowly eating more and more memory.
Mm-hmm.
I would, if you're looking to roll out FastBoot, I would stick some sort of load balancer in front of it where, that's something like Nginx, or you can do it in Express. I know some folks use hot proxy, and you can just decide, okay, am I going to send this request to FastBoot, or am I going to send this to the thing that serves the index.html?
And then when we first rolled it out, what we did was we looked, like you were saying, the user agent just rolled it out to bots.
We just rolled it out to bots. I think day one, we rolled it out to Twitter bot. When we were happy with that, we rolled it out to Slack bot, Facebook bot, and Reddit bot. And I think now we have a list of, 6 or so bots that we're serving for.
Nice.
And our next
iteration.
Yeah, our next approach here will be serving it for specific pages. So certain pages that we know the FastBoot experience is really good on.
Right. Cool.
Yeah, and I would say, going back to like the user specific content, I would say if you are writing accounting software, you're writing software with tons of private user info, skip FastBoot. Sam mentioned PWA and service worker, and if you're writing a website with tons of user specific content, just skip FastBoot. There's not going to be that much of a benefit for you. So do it for the pages where it's mostly the same for all the users.
Right. Nice. What should we talk about next?
So you were working on a project this week where the question of when do I make a component came up.
Yes.
And
it also came up in the Ember Weekend podcast, but it came up in the project I was working on. So it was interesting because there was like 3 different places online it came up in the last week or so. And the question was basically, Ember.component, as it originally was conceived when it was first added to the Ember framework, the idea behind it was like, we need something for a date picker, and we make date pickers all over the place. And when it was like Ember.view, it didn't feel right. Views were really related to templates and routes and all this. Components were these reusable things, but now basically everything is a component. But I feel like in the mind share of the community, there's still this old idea a little bit hanging on that a component is only about reusable things, right?
So when else would you make a component?
So I think the other times you make a component basically are when you're just using it to break up your UI into nice little chunks. And those are logical chunks, not reusable chunks. So the idea is components are our basic building blocks for how we build up our UIs. And if you're working in a template that has like 500 lines of code, you want some primitive to break that up and make it easier to work with. And so splitting that thing up into 3 different components, let's say you have like a user form and you have like a personal section and a work section and another section. If it makes sense to split those up into 3 components, but basically pass in the same context, let's say a model from a route into all 3, I think that's totally fine. And we've heard this referred to as a structural component, as opposed to like a reusable component, which would be like a date picker. But I think it's much easier to just have that mental model of, components are building blocks, but just because we make a component doesn't mean we need to make it reusable.
Mm-hmm. One thing I like to look for is if I have a component and let's say it has like 3 different actions and those 3 actions are completely unrelated. Like one is, update your home address. The other one is update your employment info. And the third one is, add a new phone number to your account. That's kind of an indicator for me that, maybe I could have 3 different structural components here. Maybe I could have a work address component, a phone number component, and an employment info component.
Because then if I come along and I open this thing up, I'm not going to get a single component with a dozen actions. I can very easily find out which part I'm looking for.
Right. And you can even, you can throw a comment in the top of the component saying this is structural, this is not made to be reused, this is like solving a specific use case on a specific page.
Right.
But it's easier to work with. It's easier to work in smaller chunks.
Right. And I think pods is really important here, because if you don't have pods, you end up feeling like you're trying to split something up locally, as if you would split up a method into 3 smaller methods on a class that would be close by but still related. But with like global file system, with a global file structure, you end up maybe adding things in a couple different places and the benefits aren't as clear. But with pods, you're just working at a level and then you just add 3 files right there and it's all right there. So it's very clear that it's all related to this thing. Whereas if you discover a case for a reusable component, then you would put it in the global components directory, and that's a very clear marking that this thing is meant to be reusable.
Right. So you would even have like a components directory at the route layer?
So we've done that before, where I've done both things actually in apps I've worked on, where if I'm on /user/edit, I might just throw 3 components in there. Sometimes we've done a components directory there as well. So that you don't get confused, because if you just added things without a component's namespace, you might not be able to tell whether they're a route or not, right? So that's kind of annoying. So we've done components directory for that. Now I think the modules unification thing is supposed to help here.
Yeah, I believe it is, yeah.
So they would let you do a local components directory, but not have to do the full absolute path, which is kind of annoying.
Yeah.
But I still think the benefits are worth it. And basically, with the pattern of data down, actions up, having such a strong hold on the community, and sometimes people go too early to try to make a component reusable, when really all it is just a logical grouping of part of your functionality. It's okay to pass a model into it. It's okay to add actions to it that call.save. It's okay to have links in there and transition elsewhere in the app. Basically, if this is just a big template at the route level, but you want to split it up to make it easier to work with, there's nothing wrong with that.
Now, when you split something up into a structural component, do you write integration tests for that component integration tests?
That's a good question. So this is one of the things that really grinds my gears about the generators is that, let's say I'm working on a user form or something, and I just want to create some new, just some new divisions, some new components to make it easier to work with. So I would reach for the Ember generator and run Ember generate, user form / personal section, something like this, and it's going to automatically create an integration test for that component. And I find that problematic because I don't like, because there's a lot of the tests that are generated for all these different classes where that encourage people to go to those tests and make them work. So it's like the framework is nudging you, you generate a model or you generate a route and it creates a unit test. And originally, a couple of years ago, I think I would have said, yeah, you want to fill out these things with meaningful tests. But now, so much of that logic is covered by higher level tests that we write that I think it's really kind of the opposite. These are units of the system that are well tested, and especially when we're making something like a structural component that's used in one place, we should just expect all the behavior and the APIs of the component to be well tested. That's Ember's job. And if all we're doing is rendering and calling our own actions, then we don't need to write tests for how this component would be used elsewhere in the application because it's only being used once.
Right. And you're probably writing an acceptance test, right?
Exactly. And so if you already have an acceptance test for this route that fills out this user form, the fact that you split it up from one 500-line template into 3 components means doesn't change the fact that you're still filling that out in your acceptance test. So if you're still filling out that form, you're still touching all parts of that route and that template. It just happens to be broken up into 3 structural components. And so there's no need to create new tests. So I do wish there was a way to turn off that test generator for some of those. I think I would turn it off by default for probably for most of the generated pieces. Because again, I think when you're using a framework that's batteries included like Ember, you end up writing more of the high-level tests.
Right.
So there's one more thing that you said recently that I thought was a good point, which is when it comes to the question of should I be testing a component, should I be writing integration tests for this component, one good question to ask is would this component be viable as an add-on? And if so, integration tests are probably a good idea here. So I've worked on apps before where I wrote a lot of complicated charting components. And first I was covering the basic use cases with the higher level tests, but then these charting components were being reused, and they are the kind of thing that would be in an add-on. And so I found I really did want an integration test because I just wanted to say, okay, given this data, render this component, see what it would result in. So
because the integration tests let you quickly render your component in all these different states.
Exactly. So I was writing a component, and the user of that component, the user of that thing was another developer who would be using my component. But when we write these structural components, no one is going to be using those. We're just writing this part of the application that the user is going to be using, so we should be writing these higher level tests. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a good kind of check if you have a question of whether or not I should be writing an integration test for this.
Yeah, absolutely. I worked on a custom date picker a couple weeks ago, and having integration tests there was amazing.
Yeah.
Because it was reused on multiple pages, it was all these different situations.
And you don't want to go through all those permutations with like a user session. You just want to make sure.
You want to, bootstrap your component with a set of data, run some tests against it.
Nice.
But like you said, exactly, structural components are not reused. So the value of an integration test just isn't there.
Right. And we've been doing this for a while, but I like the name structural components because it gives a name to the thing and it lets us talk about it, whether we're training people or whatever, working with people, we can just say, no, it's okay. This is just part of the structure of your app. It's not reusable. Don't worry about testing it. It's fine.
Yep.
So, cool. Kind of to wrap up, one of the things we've been talking a lot about, just like as we've been chatting over the past few weeks, has been a lot about Ember Data. How much we love it and hate it at times, but mostly love it. But it does feel like a really core part of Ember. And we use Rails a lot, and Active Record is extremely robust. It's battle tested. It handles like any kind of modeling, any domain modeling case we've had to throw at it, we can basically make it work in Rails. And Ember Data is like 80% of the way there, but then when you have to do something that goes outside of its capabilities, it becomes pretty difficult. Mm-hmm.
And not only that, we hit that 20% probably in every app we build.
Exactly.
And one example of this is transactions.
Yeah.
And we know this isn't if only Ember Data fixed it, it would work. This applies to sort of, the HTTP APIs don't have like a transaction semantic.
Exactly.
But this is definitely a pain point, and we spent about a day this week doing like transaction stuff.
Right. Yeah, it's hard.
What's an example of where a transaction would be easy in Rails, but it wouldn't be so easy in Ember Data.
Right. So the kind of thing that Rails, if you were writing a full Rails server rendered app, again, it's really the abstractions and the ORM in Active Record that have matured enough to the point where, let's say we were writing Trello and I needed to resort something, and that operation ends up updating the position on 4 cards. And so you want to save all of those 4 cards and re-render the page with a new order. And you end up changing 4 models, right? So there's 4 database operations that are happening, maybe, let's say. But from the user's perspective, for the UX of the app, there's one thing that's happened, right? Or let's say you're creating a new user and you're filling out a form and then you click add address twice. So you're creating a user and then you're creating 2 associated addresses and then you click save, right? Maybe there's 3 operations that's happened here. You've created 2 addresses, you've created a user that's associated with them. But the important thing is that in the app you're building from the UX perspective, the user is doing one operation. And in Rails, they have form for you can accept nested attributes. And so you can make a single form that, even though it kind of decomposes into 3 database operations, it all happens together or it all fails together. And that lets you write view logic that says, okay, this thing succeeded as a transaction of 3 operations or it failed as a transaction of 3 operations. But the status quo in Ember is to do something like, address1.save, address2.save, .then, user.set the addresses, and then user.save. Like, you'll even find something like this in the official guides. And the problem with that is that every one of those operations is now being done atomically, and it can either succeed or fail. And so you have 3 operations that can each exist in 2 states. You have 2 times 2 times 2, or 8 possible outcomes for all of those operations. And so you end up writing error handling logic or routing logic or just all this code to handle all of those explosion of possible states. And really, again, from the user's perspective, you're just complicating things because the user just cares, did I create this successfully or not? So I think, again, it's like you said, I think everyone's run into this. And there's obviously ways around it. People have been writing Ember apps for years. But if this were to be solved in a really nice, robust way, it can really save folks a lot of time. We were talking with Dan Gebhardt about this because he's been thinking about this problem for a long time, right? And
Dan's the author of JSON API.
He's not only the author of JSON API spec, he's also the author of JSON API resources, which is what we use to write our Rails servers. He's the author of Orbit and Ember Orbit, which is the client-side state management library kind of evolution of Ember Data plus his thoughts. And we were chatting with him about this problem, and it really is a tough problem because it needs to be solved on both sides of the wire, right? You need a client that can handle this, and you need a server that can handle it. And like you said, HTTP semantics are made to operate on single resources and do things like get, post, put, delete on one thing. But these days we're running apps that are doing bulk transactions on whole object graphs.
So what's the idea here? Is the idea to do something like you post one payload to the backend and the backend realizes that there's 3 or 4 operations?
Right. So, I hear about this a lot because folks say this when they're like mocking out their endpoints in Mirage. They're like, oh, I save a user, but actually my real server does this other thing, and I need to let my Ember app know, and how would I mock this out? And so this is kind of getting to the point, which is when you step outside of these narrow lines, you run into all these issues. So I think Dan would say that from the holistic approach, that would be a kind of a rethinking of this, would be to say, instead of thinking about saving a user, you're really always thinking about saving a graph or saving an array of operations to the current state of the store. So we have a store on the client, but even if you were doing something like a React app with Redux, you'd have a store. And then basically the idea is with Orbit, as far as I understand, you can fork the store and then you can do all sorts of things. So let's say we had a user with 2 addresses. I click edit. Now instead of mutating those models in Ember Data store, I'm working with just a clone of the store, and I can do whatever I want to it. I can delete 2 addresses. I can create 3 new ones. I can change the user's name. And then when I hit save, what this smart cache will do is say, okay, I have this cloned store. I'm going to push all these changes in one HTTP request to my server. My server will persist those changes and then notify the front end that those are done. And then this smart caching layer will be able to say that was a success. Let's roll those into Ember Data's or the client-side cache's primary store, and then your UI will re-render as a result because it's now notified that those changes have been persisted, and that's the new source of truth. And if that thing fails, then you could respond with errors, and you could show that in your form. You could click cancel, and you could just toss that clone away, and now you don't even worry about it. Whereas, again, in the app I was building, I had to do like manual change tracking to do that kind of thing.
And if one of the things, so you're posting an array of operations that the server can operate on, if one of those things fails, the server can just throw them all away.
Exactly, and so you don't have to worry about all these combinatorial explosion of states where my address 1 saved, address 2 failed, user saved. Now what do I do?
Right.
Like, how do I undo that? That's crazy. That's really hard. So that's exactly why I think Dan landed on this kind of array of operations bit, because you want to say, yep, my app from the user's perspective, it's either all pass or all fail. And of course, when you have this, you can still do like incremental UI where, let's say you did want to just delete it immediately if I archive an email in inbox and it just instantly persists it. But then I undo and I undo it. Like, you can have way more control and you can do what we can do now, but you can also do the other case where I do bulk transactions. So it seems like it's a really important thing from my perspective, because again, it's like, even though Ember Data gets us 80% of the way there, it's like you said, everybody runs into this, and this is where there's a lot of debt from this kind of stuff in apps, you know?
Mm-hmm. So how can I find out more about this?
Yeah, so I think if you wanted to know more about the work going on here, I would check out Dan's project Orbit, which I believe some folks are using. He put a lot of effort in the documentation there, and it seems really interesting. I mean, we want to try it out soon for sure. And then there's also an extension being worked on for JSON API, because the idea would be you'd want this to be supported in a standard way in the actual spec, because that would make the different implementations easier to build. So I would say keep your eyes on that repo as well. But I think there's a lot of work here, but it always helps when folks are interested and they let everyone know and help out any way they can.
Nice.
Cool, so I think that's it for this week, yeah?
Yeah, we covered what we've been working on and what we're thinking about.
All right, we'll be back next week.
Bye.